Xenos was an orphan healer so absurdly overpowered that his own party members never even noticed he was the one keeping them alive. The result? They fired him for being useless, broke, and directionless. The guy decided to open an underground clinic to treat the most powerful beast girls in the area. Somehow, though, all his clients started simping hard for the dude, so he kept finding ways to redirect each of them before Xenos ended up as the world's most wanted situationship. It all started when his longtime partner Aston decided to publicly humiliate him, saying he'd gotten bored of him and that it was time to kick him to the curb. The shock hit different, because Xenos and Aston actually had history together. When he tried to demand an explanation, all he got was laughter in his face. Aston pulled a single gold coin from his pocket, flipped it like a tip at a diner, and said the group had leveled up, and that Xenos just wasn't needed anymore. Confused, he tried to argue that he'd contributed plenty to the team, but Aston just laughed him off and told him to get lost. Before walking away, he landed one final gut punch. He asked Xenos to never mention having been part of the group, because his lowly origins from the slums could tarnish their reputation. And with that, Xenos just nodded, turned around, and walked away while the crew clowned on him from behind. Not too far from there, a slave trader was trying to make a move on an elven slave girl, but the girl decided to land a perfectly aimed kick right in the buyer's family jewels before attempting to escape, and caught a bullet in the foot as a bonus. When the guy tried to drag her back, she bit down on his finger with everything she had, and the dude completely lost it and drove a knife into her stomach. His associate even complained about how brutal that was, but Xenos, who had witnessed the whole thing, appeared out of nowhere questioning why the girl had just been stabbed. The trader told him to mind his own business, but when Xenos realized the slave girl was on her way out, he made a snap decision. He spent the only coin he had to buy her. The traders agreed on the spot without thinking twice and walked off. The slave girl, already resigned to dying, was surprised when she noticed the pain had completely vanished. Then it clicked. Xenos had already healed her. Overcome with emotion, she thanked him from the bottom of her heart. She introduced herself as Lily and felt awful that he'd spent his last cent on her, but Xenos told her not to worry about it. In practice, he was completely broke. Lily's stomach let out an absolutely legendary growl, so he changed her clothes and took her to a restaurant. There, she demolished the food and gradually learned that he'd been kicked out of his party. While Xenos was talking about needing a new source of income, a lizardman stumbled into the restaurant begging for a glass of water. Xenos gave him a clinical once-over and recognized it immediately. Magical weapon wound. The lizardman confirmed it, snarling in pain and wishing for it to stop. After examining the injury, Xenos said it was fine and that he'd sort it out in the blink of an eye. Despite it being an insanely deep wound, Xenos treated it and restored the guy's hand to perfect condition, leaving the dude completely floored. Relieved, the lizardman thanked him and dumped a handful of gold coins into Xenos' hand, then walked off promising he'd never forget that name. Right there, something clicked for Xenos. He could get paid to heal people, the same way restaurants get paid to serve food. He decided on the spot to open a clinic, but without a license, it would have to be underground. At first, he hesitated to involve Lily, but she insisted he was her master and he gave in. That very night, they went out looking for a place to set up the office and ended up at an abandoned mansion in the back alleys of the city. Xenos thought it was perfect, but Lily, visibly nervous, warned him there might be a specter lurking around. Stubborn as ever, he went in anyway, and she used light magic to illuminate the space. While they explored, a powerful specter named Carmilla appeared and tried to attack, but Xenos brushed her off without breaking a sweat. He had a flashback of when he and his old party had wiped out hundreds of specters just like her. Then he tried to apologize for invading her space, hoping she'd let them share it as tenants, but she attacked again, so he put her in her place, which only made her even more furious. Provoked, she summoned more specters to crush him, but calmed down real quick when Xenos erased all of them with a single spell. Curious, she asked who the hell he was, and Xenos simply answered that he was a healer. He then asked her to rent out a room for the clinic, and since Carmilla knew he could wipe the floor with her if she said no, she agreed without a second thought. The next morning, Xenos and Lily set up the first floor as a makeshift examination room. While Lily was stressing about the lack of clients, the lizard man from the day before, Xand, showed up. He formally introduced himself and brought his older sister, Lyra, who revealed an injured arm. Xenos quickly identified it as the effect of a special magical weapon poison. Lyra was impressed, he could tell just by looking. He explained that the poisoned hand was nearly dead and needed to be removed, and quoted an absolutely insane price for the service. Xand immediately protested, but Lyra shut him down. She smiled, calling Xenos a weird dude for having the nerve to charge that much from the leader of the lizard clan. When he realized his very first official client was a mob boss, Xenos doubled down, explaining that he didn't just plan to remove the arm, he planned to grow a new one, and he made it crystal clear he wouldn't be healing anyone for free, no matter what the patient had to offer. Lyra found it hard to believe any back alley healer could actually regenerate limbs, But when she agreed to the deal, Xenos formed a mana scalpel and amputated the decaying arm. To spare her the pain, he anesthetized with magic and instantly grew a brand new limb from scratch. Carmilla, who had been secretly rooting for him to fail, watched her hopes crash and burn as Xenos pulled it off with flawless precision. Impressed, Lyra said she liked him, promised to send her people to the clinic, and even offered herself for exclusive future treatments. Later that night, Lily served tea for Xenos and Carmilla and asked how Lyra had gotten hurt. Xenos concluded it was probably connected to the ongoing beef between the lizard clan, the orcs, and the werewolves. Suddenly, the clinic door burst open, and Livia, the werewolf leader, stormed in with her wolfkin crew in tow. She declared she came for Xenos' neck, blaming him for healing the lizard clan, her eternal rivals. She went at him with an axe, but the weapon shattered against his force field. Xenos calmly sent Lily to her room and stood there watching the werewolves try, completely in vain, to land a single hit. Furious, Livia ordered her guys to trash the place and tear everything apart. When Carmilla finally had enough, she appeared ready to curse the werewolves into turning into rats every full moon. But Xenos stopped her. Terrified, the werewolves immediately apologized for the damage they'd caused. Convinced that Xenos was some kind of monster who could make an absurdly powerful specter call him daddy. A few days later, an orc showed up at the clinic saying that Letitia, the orc boss, wanted a word. The moment Xenos heard she had a condition keeping her from moving, he personally went to the orc headquarters to examine her. Upon arriving, he discovered Letitia already knew everything about him through her underground intel network. After recounting everything she'd heard, she asked him to examine her to figure out what was causing the confinement. Xenos ran a scan and detected a magic stone lodged in her lower abdomen with the potential to explode at any moment. He asked how it had ended up in there, and she said she'd mistaken it for a rice ball and swallowed it. Disappointed, he apologized and said she'd be fine as long as she used the bathroom in time. But when he turned to leave, she stopped him, saying it could explode at any second. Despite the situation, her men stayed right by her side, ready to go down with her if it came to that. Surprisingly, she tossed Xenos the key to all the wealth she'd accumulated over the years, demanding he use it responsibly. Xenos deliberated for a moment before sprinting back to her, and used his scalpel to extract the magic stone, healed her on the spot, and suppressed the explosion with his bare hands. Then he handed the key back, saying he believed in the law of balance. Beaming, she promised to send her people to the clinic every single day. A few days later, Lily got noticeably pouty when she realized the mob bosses had started showing up at the clinic with a suspicious level of frequency. Xenos agreed, asking why they kept appearing without so much as a scratch, and Carmilla answered with a smug little grin. They wanted the D. When Xenos argued he wasn't some walking vending machine, Carmilla taunted him by saying there was a very real chance all three clans would go to war over him. Meanwhile, Lily sulked, muttering that she didn't have the assets to compete with the trio of demi-humans. The next day, Lyra, Livia, and Letitia all showed up at the clinic at the same time with gifts, each asking Xenos to take their side against the others. Carmilla clowned on him, saying everything was playing out exactly as she'd predicted, while Lily made her best about-to-cry face out of jealousy. Completely baffled, Xenos showed up at the Colosseum the next day to watch the clans battle it out. He announced he wouldn't interfere and told them to go all out until they were satisfied. So they agreed. Whoever won the competition would win Xenos. The battle began, and after a few hours, they realized that no matter how devastating the blows they landed were, their opponents kept getting back up. Then Xenos explained that even though he'd promised not to interfere, they were still his patients, and he simply couldn't stand there watching them die in front of him. He told them how pointless it was to keep fighting like that, and said they could continue if they wanted, but that they'd still have to pay for every bit of effort he'd spent keeping them alive. With that, the girls gave up and decided to bury the hatchet. Watching how Xenos had handled the whole situation, Lily asked why he'd chosen to unite them, and he quoted a line from the best teacher he'd ever had. Top-tier healers can make the world a better place. Impressed by how drastically Xenos had cut down the number of patients, Lily said she liked him, but he took it as a big sister kind of affection. A few days later, the division commander of the council summoned Krishna, the vice commander famously known as the Iron Rose, to his private quarters. He filled her in on the rumors circulating throughout the kingdom about a mediator who had somehow managed to unite the races of the outer zones. While that unity might look noble on the surface, the commander feared that the growing alliance between the three demi-human clans could one day pose a serious threat to the kingdom's hierarchical system. He explained that the kingdom's fragile balance only held together because people were too busy blaming each other and fighting over the lower classes to worry about bigger problems. To him, if the demi-human factions ever truly united, that could shatter the balance and give the people a common cause, which could very easily become a rebellion against the crown. The commander then ordered Krishna to investigate the mentor behind it all and bring him to justice. Xenos sneezed at exactly that moment, but the girls thought he was coming down with a cold and offered every home remedy imaginable. Stung by not having what it took to compete on the front lines, Lily walked off sulking. Zenos then treated Lyra's wounds, and she mentioned she'd gotten them in a run-in with the Iron Rose while trying to infiltrate an aristocratic estate the day before. Hearing about yet another potential love interest for Zenos, Carmilla teased that the knight might join the collection. Unbothered, Zenos convinced himself the knight had nothing to do with him. Meanwhile, Krishna arrived in the slum district and was visibly shocked to see demi-humans freely mingling with one another. Disguised as a commoner, she asked one of them who the mediator was, but the demi-human refused to give up Zenos' identity, saying they owed him a debt they could never repay. Furious, she aimed a magic weapon at him as a threat. But Lyra and several other demi-humans materialized out of nowhere, forcing Krishna to back off with more questions than answers. While fleeing through the forest, Krishna got lost and ended up at the first building she came across, which happened to be Zenos' clinic. When she met him, she explained that she had absolutely terrible navigation skills and asked for help finding her way back to the city. While Zenos was offering to guide her, Lily came out to see what was going on, and Krishna immediately noticed her pointed ears, realizing right away she wasn't human. Without hesitating, she drew her magic weapon and fired at Zenos, declaring she'd finally found who she was looking for. While Lily tried to explain that Krishna had the wrong idea about Zenos, he casually shook off the effects of the shot like it was confetti. Taking Lily's explanation into account about how Zenos had rescued her from slave traders, Krishna apologized for misjudging the situation. Curious, she asked how on earth he'd walked that attack off. Zenos explained that he'd used a basic defensive spell, but she found that hard to swallow, since defensive magic normally wasn't capable of stopping magic weapons, unless he was that guy. Krishna introduced herself and laid out the mission she'd been given, demanding his cooperation. When he realized he was her target, Zenos tried to reason with her by suggesting that maybe the so-called mediator preferred to keep a low profile, but Krishna cut him off, saying someone with that level of power could easily threaten the entire nation, and that she needed to secure him before anything else. Spotting a spare bed in the clinic, she declared she'd be spending the night. For reasons nobody quite understood, Lily got jealous and pressured Zenos into giving her a special treatment before she fell asleep. Carmilla, who Krishna apparently couldn't see, showed up to mess with Zenos, leaving the Iron Rose suspicious about what was going on. Zenos realized he needed to keep his poker face as sharp as light Yagami if he didn't want his cover blown. Not long after Lily fell asleep, Krishna tried to pump Zenos for information about the slave traders he'd rescued Lily from, but he had nothing useful to offer. On her own, she connected the traders to the underground healer she'd heard about, the one supposedly capable of regenerating limbs. She ruled Zenos out of the equation, deciding he was already a prodigy in defensive magic. Zenos asked why she had so much beef with the slums, and she explained that her mother had been killed years ago while trying to help starving people in the area. She said that on that day, she made the decision to become an unstoppable hero, powerful enough to bring justice to the crimes of the slums and make sure no one else would ever suffer the same fate. That drive earned her the title of youngest vice commander in the history of the Royal Knights, and she had no intention of stopping. The nickname Iron Rose came from the fact that her face had been like an iron mask ever since that day, not a single smile. The next morning, after Krishna left, Lyra, who had already become a regular due to her never-ending stream of injuries, showed up for yet another treatment. Shortly after, Krishna reappeared, claiming she'd gotten lost again. Lyra, who had a mile-long list of unfinished business with her, recognized the Iron Rose immediately and switched into combat mode. Krishna did the same. Although Lily tried to explain that Lyra was also a client and was there for the same reason, Krishna wasn't buying it. She demanded to know the location of the mediator, the same one who had supposedly regenerated Lyra's arm, the very same arms Krishna clearly remembered destroying herself. Not wanting to take another obvious beatdown, Lyra switched tactics and went verbal. She pulled off an absolutely legendary gaslighting session on Krishna, calling out her shallow mentality of blaming the slums for everything wrong with the kingdom. Krishna was about to eat another L when Zenos stepped in. He casually said there was no need for violence because he was the mediator. She immediately denied it, saying the mediator was supposedly a master of high-level healing magic, and that it was impossible for anyone to wield 2 schools of magic with that level of mastery. Zenos shrugged, saying that while master was way too flattering, he preferred to think of himself as just a normal mage. He added that both healing magic and defensive magic were about amplifying the body's natural functions, so they were basically the same thing. Krishna refused to believe it, but concluded that he had chosen to side with the mediator and the demi-humans, and left. The next morning, Krishna went to visit Lord Calendar, a well-connected noble, and discussed recent theft operations in the area. She demanded he tighten the kingdom's security, while she conducted an inspection of the palace. During the inspection, she noticed something off about the uneven distribution of soldiers and decided to investigate. In the back of the palace, she stumbled into a dungeon and was horrified to find a group of enslaved people being held captive. She immediately realized that Lord Calendar was running some sinister operation. Before she could act, he appeared and struck her with a magic weapon, wounding her badly. As he prepared to deliver the finishing blow, Lyra and Xenos appeared out of nowhere to stop him. Desperate, Lord Calendar fired at them, but not a single shot got through Xenos' defensive magic. Realizing just how hopeless the situation was, he begged for mercy. But Xenos denied it coldly, reminding him that he had shown zero mercy to either them or the enslaved people. Then he aimed the magic weapon at Lord Calendar and fired, deliberately limiting the impact to avoid killing him. Krishna, who had lost an arm and now had a hole in her stomach, was ready to say goodbye to the world when Xenos approached. He used his magic to fully restore her, leaving her shaken and wondering who he really was. Knowing how deeply Krishna craved recognition as a hero, Xenos let her take the credit for rescuing the slaves. Realizing things would get complicated if the royal knights found out what had actually gone down, Xenos and Lyra got ready to head out. But before they could leave, Krishna stopped them and asked why they'd come to save her. Xenos casually answered that she still had a lot of tabs to pay off and that he intended to keep her alive until every last one was settled. Hearing that, Krishna smiled for the first time in years. One day, while walking through the slums with Lily, Xenos reflected on how he'd first met Aston, who had recruited him into the group as nothing more than a doormat. Aston had simply bossed Xenos around without ever realizing it was him quietly healing everyone's wounds. He never acknowledged Xenos' contributions and eventually kicked him out. Meanwhile, the Golden Phoenix Party took a job under the command of Fennel, one of the 7 nobles, to clear out a cave full of magical beasts. Thinking it'd be a cakewalk, they went in way too confident, but the fight turned into an absolute nightmare fast. Beaten and on the ground, they bolted. Outside, Aston blamed the team for the poor performance, but one member confronted him, calling him a disgusting hypocrite. Another suggested that maybe Xenos had been secretly healing them the whole time, but Aston refused to admit it. He insisted that a real healer would never come from the slums. Even so, they decided to recruit an actual licensed healer from the city before trying again. Time passed, and they brought on Omen, a freshly licensed healer. As their support, Aston explained that the plan was to kill the beasts and make a scarf from their hide as a birthday present for Fennel's daughter. With renewed determination, the Golden Phoenix Party went back into the cave to take on the Fire Foxes. The foxes charged forward, and in the chaos, the party's caster got hit by the flames. Omen healed him quickly, saving his life while Aston tried to rally the group. Even so, it wasn't enough and they barely escaped again. Outside, Aston unloaded on Guile, blaming his defensive spell. But Omen shut him up, saying Guile's shield was exactly why their teammate wasn't already dead. When Aston demanded she heal him completely, she snapped, telling him he'd need the Royal Hospital for that, because only elite healers or medical science could restore damage that severe. That's when it finally hit Aston. Ever since he'd booted Xenos, they'd been taking heavier and heavier hits and struggling more with every mission. He wondered whether Xenos was actually at the level of the elite healers Omen had mentioned, and asked if it was even possible for someone to wield that kind of healing magic without a license. Suspicious, she asked why he was suddenly bringing this up, but Aston went quiet. Not long after, Fennel's butler arrived to terminate the contract, calling them dead weight for the failed mission. Aston begged for another shot, lying that the failure was Xenos' fault, a former member who had betrayed them. He even swore on his own life, but the butler was unmoved, pointing out that Charlotte's birthday had already passed and that the noble had lost all faith in them. Aston insisted they could still complete the mission if given one more chance, promising to bring in fresh blood. After the butler left, Aston admitted to the team that he planned to recruit Xenos again. Even though he'd never want to admit that their success depended on Xenos, he figured having him around as a good luck charm would be enough until the group could rebuild their reputation. Determined, they set out to find him. Aston even floated the idea of hiring one of the 3 demi-human leaders to boost the group's firepower. They soon arrived at Lyra's camp. Seeing that she was in a hurry, Aston tried to play the big shot while pitching her. But the moment she learned he was the idiot who'd kicked Xenos out, she hit the floor laughing, calling him an absolute clown. Offended, Aston tried to draw his sword against her, but she looked at him in a way that made him very quickly remember exactly who she was. Frustrated, he headed to Livia's camp. The Wolfkin leader, more blunt than anyone, immediately cussed Aston out the moment she found out he was the one who dropped Xenos. He got a little aggressive and she almost made him wet himself. Finally, they visited Letitia, and after getting the same reaction from her, Aston stopped Guile from talking back, and they left the territory. Outside, Aston convinced himself none of it could be real, that Xenos had somehow won over all these crazy, powerful women, cutting off access for everyone else. So he concluded that the kid he'd taken in was simply some other guy who happened to share a name with the slum doctor. Suddenly, he spotted Xenos walking through the city with Lily. He called out to him, trying to act like the big man, expecting Xenos to be pumped to see him, but Xenos just ignored him. Embarrassed, Aston called out again, saying he'd been looking for him and that he wanted him back in the group. To his surprise, Xenos turned him down, saying there was absolutely no chance of joining someone who had treated him badly without at least making it right first. Still full of himself, Aston repeated the offer like a broken record. So Xenos offered to take part in missions when he was available, but with the condition of being paid per heal. And he quoted a price so high that Aston exploded, asking who he thought he was, figuring Xenos had no ground to stand on. To his surprise, a crowd of demi-humans appeared, casually greeting Xenos and asking who that loud redhead was. After hearing enough griping, Xenos turned down Aston's offer and walked away. Fuming, Aston drew his weapon and tried to attack him, but Krishna shot the sword out of his hand before it got anywhere near him. Surprised, Xenos asked what Krishna was doing in the slums, and she said her situationship radar went off the moment he walked by. Unable to wrap his head around how Xenos kept accumulating an entire roster, Aston blamed Guile for egging him on to attack Xenos and stormed off. Later, the trio of demi-human leaders gathered at the underground clinic and filled Xenos in on what his former party members had been up to. They found it suspicious that their people had lost track of the group, so they hoped Aston and the rest weren't wrapped up with the underground guild. It was a guild that handled the kind of jobs the demi-human gangs wouldn't touch. Xenos and Carmilla weren't worried since they figured Aston didn't have the cash to hire guild members to carry out his plans. Lyra, on the other hand, filled them in about the guide, a mysterious figure willing to carry out jobs without any payment. Later that night, Lily made tea for Xenos when she noticed he couldn't sleep. She stroked his hair to help him drift off, but ended up falling asleep herself, and he carried her inside. In the living room, Carmilla joined him for tea and asked how he'd learned magic growing up in the middle of the slums. He opened up about how he'd once tried to resurrect the dead before his master gave him a legendary lecture. The old woman had corrected him, saying that back in her day there was something called artificial life, the magic of creating golems. Curious about what Carmilla had been up to 300 years ago, Xenos asked, but as always, she dodged the question. Suddenly, tremors echoed through the house, and Carmilla deduced they were coming from the slums. She flew outside the mansion and saw a golem tearing through the neighborhood. Minutes earlier, Aston had met with someone from the underground guild who said he wouldn't require payment for his services. He hired him out of pure spite, but the guide only accepted after asking his reasons. Aston told him what he wanted, and the guide agreed to take the job. He revealed a relic he'd been working on, calling it the perfect opportunity to test it out. Hours passed, and Xenos headed into the slums after finding out the cause of the tremors. While Carmilla wondered how an ancient relic had ended up in the current era, the demi-human leaders arrived to fill Xenos in on the incident. They told him that many of the beastkin had been critically wounded, and he explained what the golem was. Xenos deduced that the monster had come from inside the slums and wondered whether it had come from the underground guild. He quickly brushed the thought aside and ordered the girls to gather all the wounded in one location. Elsewhere, the guide was observing the golem wreaking havoc across the city and making notes that it wasn't as agile as he'd anticipated. He eagerly awaited Xenos' reaction as his admirers started dropping one by one. After gathering the wounded in a safe place, Xenos told Carmilla to stand back, then cast high heal on all of them. He treated them one by one, and after a massive effort, Xenos finally vented, saying he was absolutely furious with whoever had ordered this. The guide, watching Xenos heal everyone, complimented him for exceeding expectations. He noted that if Xenos didn't stop the golem, they'd never find a solution to the problem. After a grueling effort to get everyone back on their feet, Xenos asked Carmilla whether the golem would come back. She answered that artificial life doesn't stop until its orders are carried out. She found it strange that someone had gotten their hands on a magic stone of such purity, one that should have been used up during the demi-human wars. About 300 years ago, during the Demon Lord's reign, those stones only existed in the southern part of his castle. Fed up with the situation, Xenos and the girls decided to take the golem down. Carmilla instructed them to destroy the magic stone in the core. They pushed forward, and Xenos acted as support for the girls. He buffed their stats, boosting agility, strength, and impact. They charged in and easily shattered it, but it instantly regenerated and launched Livia aside like she was nothing. To everyone's surprise, she came back fully healed. After analyzing the golem and providing support for the girls, Xenos ordered them to go after its legs. Suddenly, it toppled in the direction of a small girl, and as Xenos sprinted to save her, the golem shocked everyone by choosing to protect the child itself. The twist left the guide baffled, as he waited for Xenos to make his final call. Xenos, however, ran a scan on the golem and told Carmilla that whoever gave the order had probably tried to create life using an imperfect magic stone. Based on the analysis, he deduced that Aston was inside the golem. Watching Xenos work, The guide noted that fusing an imperfect magic stone with a simple-minded person was the perfect recipe for creating a golem. He wondered how Xenos would handle the situation now that he'd uncovered the truth. Back in the slums, Xenos told the girls to leave so he could face the golem alone. At first, they insisted on helping, but eventually they obeyed and fell back. Before leaving, Carmilla said she'd leave the tea waiting for him. Alone with the golem, Xenos tried to convince Aston that there was still humanity left in him, but sensing nothing but pure rage, he opened the golem and found Aston being used as the core. He said it would be the last time they'd ever see each other, and with one strike, he cut him. The guide was shocked to see Xenos use the blade on Aston without hesitation. But then he realized that Xenos was cutting and healing Aston over and over. It was so precise that he was eliminating the parts fused with a magic stone while healing whatever flesh remained. Before landing the final blow, Xenos told Aston that the world would be better off without him, but that he'd save him for 3 reasons. First, he planned to collect the debt from Aston's collaborator, which meant Aston would have to give up whoever had gotten him mixed up in all of this. Second, Aston had once taken him out of the slums and tipped him a gold coin on impulse. It was that single coin that had allowed him to save Lily and open the underground clinic. The third was that it was his duty as a healer to save lives. With that, Xenos struck the core and freed Aston. Afterward, Aston admitted how incredible Xenos truly was and wondered if saving him was his form of revenge. Then he apologized after getting a taste of what it felt like to use people. To his surprise, Xenos told him to stop talking because he needed to hit him. He buffed his own strength and said the reason he'd kept him alive was that he wouldn't feel right punching someone who was unconscious. Aston tried to ask for a timeout, but Xenos insisted on serving up a fresh knuckle sandwich with a side of consequences. That morning, on top of leaving with his face rearranged, Aston was charged with multiple crimes. But as he feared the worst, Krishna told him that Xenos had taken his sword and left him a goodbye tip. When Aston saw the gold coin in his hand, he cried like he'd just won the lottery. On the way back to the clinic, Xenos ran into the girls and they carried him home, saying it was the least they could do after everything he'd done for them. Meanwhile, the guide slipped away into hiding, noting that he'd cross paths with Xenos again someday and that he wouldn't forget him. When Xenos arrived at the clinic, he found Carmilla and Lily waiting for him. Lily explained that Carmilla had been floating anxiously around the house worrying about him, though Carmilla vigorously insisted that Lily was lying. Unlike Carmilla, Lily openly admitted she'd been worried. Then she handed Xenos a cup of tea and said, "Welcome back." In response, Xenos simply said he was home. The next day, Krishna filled Xenos in that she'd confirmed the mastermind behind the golem attack was an individual who called himself the Guide, but she hadn't been able to track down his whereabouts. Lyra added what she knew. He'd started frequenting the underground guild recently and always moved alone. Letitia pointed out that interrogating people only got you so far, and Krishna concluded that the guide wouldn't be showing his face for a while since the royal guard was on his trail. The demi-humans, however, speculated that he'd resurface sooner or later, believing he still had schemes in motion and deeper ties in the underworld. Taken aback, Krishna told them to stop throwing guesses around. Unlike them, her deductions came from actual investigation and real experience. Sensing the tension was rising, Xenos paused the conversation. Seeing Krishna sitting apart from the others, he told them to stop talking at each other from opposite sides of the room. On the defensive, Krishna explained that she couldn't be seen with them because of her position as a knight. Offended, the demi-humans shot back that they didn't want her at the table anyway. Fed up with the constant bickering, Xenos kicked everyone out of the clinic and announced he was taking the day off because he was exhausted. Shortly after they left, Lily walked over with an idea, hoping to convince him to go to the hot springs. But before she could finish, Lyra walked in and called dibs. He agreed, and barely after he stepped out, Livia and Letitia made the exact same request. Even the Iron Rose showed up afterward, demanding the same thing. Once they were gone, Xenos asked what Lily had wanted to say, but she blew up and told him to forget it. Carmilla, who had been watching the whole thing for pure entertainment, appeared and announced she'd be tagging along to the hot springs. Later that night, Xenos was unwinding in the warm bath when Lyra casually appeared. She explained that she'd put up a maintenance sign to keep other men from coming in. She slipped into the water and admitted that her subordinates had noticed she'd been acting differently lately. Xenos agreed, and as they talked, he noticed the distance between them had shrunk to mere inches, unlike a certain part of him, which was already standing at full attention. Seeing that Xenos hadn't let his guard down, Lyra tried to make her move, but Livia showed up. She tried to throw herself at Xenos to help him with his situation, but Lyra blocked her and the two started going at it over who'd get to be the one tonight. In the middle of all that, Letitia dramatically emerged from the water, putting her full plot on display for his eyes to feast on. While the trio fought over whose turn it was, Krishna appeared and tried to call them out, but quickly got sucked into the chaos right along with them. Fed up, Xenos finally yelled at all of them to go to the women's section, and they reluctantly obeyed. Meanwhile, in the women's bath, Omen spotted that odd little crew bathing together and noticed Lily sulking with envy over the older women. When Lily joined them, Carmilla appeared and taunted her, saying bigger wasn't always better, unlike actually knowing how to satisfy a man. She kept roasting Lily until Omen realized Carmilla was a specter and tried to exorcise her. In a panic, Carmilla bolted straight for Xenos' bath, losing her towel in the process. After the bath, they threw a little party, though Krishna sadly ate alone at a separate table. Later that night, after the others got drunk and passed out, Xenos joined Carmilla, completely drained, and said how the girls had constructed entire games just for a shot at catching a whiff of the goods. Then he wondered what the point of taking a day off was, if he still ended up stressed. But Carmilla advised him to enjoy these lively moments, because she believed he'd be dragged into far more complicated matters soon. Changing the subject, Xenos discovered that Carmilla could move around by possessing objects she was connected to. She showed him her staff, which Lily had brought to the inn. Curious, he asked what she had been like when she was alive, but Carmilla dodged the question and topped off his drink instead of answering. The next morning, an explosion rocked one of the rooms and people rushed in to tend to the injured man. Omen discovered that fire magic stones had blown up while he was trying to cook, leaving him with severe burns. She tried to heal him but admitted that at her skill level, it would take several hours for the wounds to close and that he might never be able to hold a knife properly again. Suddenly, Xenos walked in asking what had happened. After Omen explained, she asked him to help carry the man to a nearby royal hospital station. To her surprise, Xenos said that wasn't necessary, then casually healed the man and walked out with Lily. Omen, completely floored, rated his skill as being on the level of an elite healer. Back at her post, she reported the incident to Dr. Becker, who noted that people like Xenos were so rare that the government would probably want him as a national asset. At first, he brushed it off, but when Omen mentioned Xenos' black coat, Becker immediately perked up and deduced that Xenos had to be somewhere in the slums. Later, Lyra's brother brought Becker in disguised as a commoner, pretending he'd vomited blood before collapsing. Xenos examined him and quickly recognized it: red lung. Alarmed, he told Lily to step back to avoid contagion, noting that the pandemic had been eradicated years ago with a cure. But here it was again, in a new form. To his shock, Becker sat up and complimented Xenos for identifying the illness so quickly. He revealed himself to be an elite healer from the Royal Hospital. But before he could say more, Omen stormed the clinic, absolutely furious with Becker for putting himself at risk just to track down Xenos. Becker then calmly took an antidote and explained that he'd ingested a drug that mimicked the symptoms of red lung. Xenos wondered where he could have possibly gotten such an antidote, knowing that only one person had ever had access to it. Then it clicked. Becker was the very doctor who had eradicated the red lung pandemic. When Becker noticed Xenos' black coat, he realized it had once belonged to Xenos' nameless master. After a moment of reflection, Becker asked if Xenos would be willing to work at the Royal Hospital, explaining that they were dealing with a serious problem. Suddenly, the demi-human trio burst in after spotting the red flag above the clinic signaling an emergency. They closed in on Xenos and threatened Becker, assuming he'd started a fight inside the clinic. Completely unfazed and even impressed, Becker complimented Xenos for uniting the clans. Then he put an offer on the table. Xenos accepted, saying he wanted to stay on Becker's good side now that the nobles already knew where he was. He also considered Becker trustworthy, since he'd distributed vaccines for free during the red lung crisis. Finally, he admitted he wanted to learn more about his master, since Becker had known him personally. With that, the deal was sealed. Xenos arrived at the Royal Hospital in his official uniform and followed Becker to his office, where Becker confirmed that his identity as the underground healer would remain protected. From that point on, he'd be known as Xeno, Becker's apprentice. With Becker himself vouching for his actions, they got straight down to business and discussed the ongoing case of missing persons. After the meeting, Xenos returned to the dormitory and found Lily waiting for him, listed in the paperwork as his little sister. He thanked Omen for bringing her along. Once Omen was gone, Lily immediately went full sus, acting like a little housewife. Baffled, Xenos asked where she'd picked that up, only for Carmilla to waltz in bragging about being the mastermind behind it all. Seeing her inside the hospital, Xenos warned Carmilla she could easily get exorcised or detected by one of the elite healers. She ignored the warning, muttering to herself that very few people in the world possessed her level of healing magic. Later at lunch, Omen explained that to get a healer's license, Xenos would need to graduate from a prep school. After that, he could work at a royal hospital station, get an adventurer's license, or serve nobles or the military. She also broke down the healer ranking system, which left Xenos struggling to process all the information. Quickly changing the subject, he asked about the missing persons. She talked about Fred, an advanced healer and deputy head of the lab who had mysteriously vanished. Fred was one of the leading contributors to developing the cure for red lung. When Xenos asked if she had any leads, she was just about to answer when Professor Goldrin, vice director of the Royal Hospital and a Class 7 advanced healer, arrived with an imposing entourage. Omen calmly explained how the hospital had shifted its priorities. Ever since Goldrin had taken power, favoring the wealthy while neglecting ordinary people, and backed by influential nobles, he was completely untouchable. Xenos immediately decided he'd stay as far away from him as possible, but Omen left him floored by suggesting that Goldrin might be connected to Afrid's disappearance. She laid out how Afrid had been loaned to Goldrin's laboratory and vanished a month later. Her strategy was to get Xenos to build a name for himself so that Goldrin would eventually notice him and try to bring him on board. Xenos admitted he didn't think too highly of himself, saying his social standing would only make things harder. Omen was shocked. He had absolutely no idea how genuinely incredible he was. But before she could say more, Wembley, one of Goldrin's most arrogant students, showed up. He went around bragging about his own faction, then spotted Xenos and immediately recognized him as Becker's new apprentice. He flashed a smug grin and walked off, leaving a deeply annoying energy in his wake. During a class, Xenos reflected on his younger days, remembering how his master had drilled healing magic lessons into both him and Vetra, making sure the two of them could recite healer classifications from memory. In class, the professor gave a detailed breakdown of healing magic. When the topic shifted to the undead, Xenos immediately thought of Carmilla, especially when the lecturer emphasized that this type of specter was extremely dangerous and that students should run if they ever encountered one. To lighten the mood, the professor asked if anyone had ever exorcised an undead. Wembley proudly declared he'd taken down 30 and then tried to rub it in Xenos' face. Xenos played along, casually comparing Wembley's achievement to his own level, but the plan backfired and he ended up overshooting way further than he intended. In the next class, Wembley sat next to him, and when students were asked to draw a magic circle for the class, Wembley presented his work full of himself. The professor immediately tried to recruit him, but Wembley arrogantly announced he already belonged to Goldrin. Then he challenged Xenos to show what he was made of, so Xenos drew a magic circle with an impossible level of detail. At first, Wembley laughed, but when he saw the professor staring at the drawing with his jaw on the floor, his amusement curdled into pure rage. Meanwhile, one of the staff reported Xenos' supposed feat to Goldrin. Coincidentally, Goldrin had just received reports of multiple undead at a cemetery, so he made sure Xenos was included in the mission to eliminate them, to see if he was really everything people were saying. Later at dinner, Xenos told Lily and Carmilla that he'd been assigned to clear undead from a church cemetery. He noticed Carmilla didn't seem the least bit concerned. That night, Wembley led a group of students to the cemetery to exorcise the ghosts, but nearly had an accident in his pants. Luckily, Xenos cleared the entire area, but Wembley quickly grabbed the credit and swore he'd never allow Xenos to work under Goldrin. To Wembley's surprise, Xenos didn't argue. Instead, he told everyone they weren't done with the undead yet. Shortly after, a zombie king appeared, and the other students begged Wembley to deal with it. The poor guy, who had been faking it the whole time, started sweating bullets when he realized the end was near. He threw his most powerful spell at the creature, but it regenerated instantly. Xenos then let him try again, and as expected, Wembley got folded like last week's laundry. When the monster grabbed him and was about to make a meal out of him, Wembley finally begged for help. Xenos stepped in and used healing magic to finish off the zombie king. After being rescued, Wembley tried to act like nothing had happened and like he hadn't just lost every point of composure seconds ago. Xenos then remembered being told that undead are generally attracted by a more powerful specter of the same kind. He sat with that thought while Omen and Wembley bickered, and at the same moment Carmilla sneezed at the reference. When Xenos returned to the dormitory, he told Carmilla about his discovery. The undead were being drawn in by her. She asked if he was going to kick her out, but he surprised her by saying she should stay by his side. Lily, of course, immediately started daydreaming about receiving the same invitation. Carmilla, for her part, promised to keep being a pain in his side. Back at school, Wembley, ever chasing glory, shocked everyone by telling the supervisor that Xenos had nearly collapsed under the weight of the last mission. After walking out, he declared furiously that he was finally even with Xenos. Later, Becker met with Xenos and congratulated him because Goldrin appeared to be interested. With step 1 complete, he asked him to keep impressing Goldrin. Xenos, seeing how much work still lay ahead, asked why Goldrin ranked above Becker if Becker was already so prominent. Becker explained that in their country, politics mattered more than titles. Not long after, Goldrin summoned Xenos for a meeting. When he showed up, he quickly learned just how much influence healers held in the kingdom. Goldrin laid out his ambition to rise into the ruling class so that every kind of high-value woman would be fawning over him. He asked Xenos to reproduce the magic circle he'd drawn in class. Goldrin's second secretary handed him a sheet of paper. Xenos sketched the circle effortlessly, and then asked what Goldrin's actual goal was. He answered that he wanted to see the true extent of Xenos' knowledge. After studying the diagram, he explained that there were many different schools of thought behind magic circle design. If Xenos wanted to work under him, he'd need to prove himself not just capable, but credible. With that, Goldrin praised the work and told him he could start in the laboratory the next day. The next day, Wembley welcomed Xenos like he was the senior veteran of the building. He rattled off a long list of rules and made it clear that Xenos had gotten the position thanks to his recommendation. Wembley didn't hide the fact that he planned to use Xenos to climb the ranks. Xenos quickly realized that Wembley was actually the lowest-ranking member of Goldrin's inner circle, and that Goldrin liked visiting patients with his students. Minutes later, they walked into a ward. Curious, Xenos moved closer to observe how Goldrin healed. He was stunned to see Goldrin draining the life force from his own students to treat the patient. Xenos quietly stepped back in line and Wembley filled him in, saying that was one of the reasons Goldrin had so many loyal followers. Xenos asked about Afrid, but Wembley admitted he wasn't a fan. After pressing a little more, Xenos learned that Afrid had been invited to a dinner, like Goldrin's other favorites, but vanished shortly after. To Wembley, that invitation was basically a guaranteed spot at Goldrin's side in the future, and he was clearly green with envy. Xenos quietly absorbed everything and reported back to Becker. Becker thanked him for his efforts so far and asked him to become one of Goldrin's favorites and secure an invitation to one of those dinners. In return, he promised extra pay and guaranteed that Xenos' underground work would remain protected. Xenos sighed and agreed, but made Becker promise that regardless of how things ended, he'd tell him about his master. Becker agreed, and when he stood up, a handful of coins of different values scattered across the floor. He asked Xenos which one he'd pick up first, then asked whether all lives were equal. Before Xenos could answer, Omen burst in and dragged Becker away, scolding him for nearly being late to a meeting. Meanwhile, Livia showed up at the underground clinic just to catch a whiff of Xenos' scent. To her surprise, she found Lyra already there with the home field advantage, cleaning the place up. Then Letitia kicked the clinic door open, loudly announcing the brilliant idea she'd just had. Within minutes, the trio ended up cleaning the whole place together. The next day, Wembley bragged about being put in charge of Goldrin's dog while endlessly sucking up to the professor. He also told Xenos that Goldrin was meeting with the 7 principal nobles. From the way he talked, it was obvious Wembley dreamed of being promoted to a lavish lifestyle, surrounded by all the women he could win over. Xenos called him out for forgetting the whole point of being a healer, but Wembley brushed it off, saying healing magic wasn't as reliable as money and power. Out of nowhere, a drunk guy named Bond staggered over and talked trash about the dog. As he stumbled back inside, Wembley explained that was Goldrin's first secretary, someone who did nothing but drink all day. Suddenly, Bonds tossed a wine bottle to Wembley. He tried to catch it, missed, and the bottle shattered on the ground near him. Startled, the dog bolted into the street and got hit by a carriage. In a panic, Wembley threw his best healing magic at the little guy, but it wasn't enough. He froze. Xenos calmly stepped in and fully healed the dog without even needing to chant an incantation. For once, Wembley was speechless. Floored by the skill gap between them, Xenos picked up the dog to find somewhere for him to rest, and Wembley trailed after him like a lost puppy. Later that afternoon, when Xenos returned to his room, he found Omen waiting outside. She asked him to take a walk with her. As they left the dormitory, she apologized for not being capable enough to handle the task Becker had given to him. Xenos was surprised she'd called him out just for that. He told her not to worry about it and reminded her he was being paid regardless. To ease her stress, he added that thanks to Becker, he'd had the chance to see the Royal Hospital and learn more about his master, so there was plenty he was getting out of all of this. Relieved, Omen told him to reach out if he ever needed anything. Then she asked what kind of person his master was. Xenos explained that despite his sketchy appearance, he was the one who had taught him to read, write, and everything else he knew. He admitted he owed his master his life. Omen related to that, saying his story reminded her of her own with Becker. Becker was her mother's younger brother and had closely guided her when she wanted to become a healer, which was why she now looked after him. Even though Becker was her mentor, Omen confessed she found his research boring and going nowhere. Xenos encouraged her, saying the most important things in life tend to be the most boring ones. With her spirits lifted, she thanked him for cheering her up even though she'd originally come to apologize. He told her it was good to lean on others sometimes. Then he joked about how he could barely get out of bed on his own. From the shadows, Carmilla laughed and called Omen yet another potential wife. When they returned to the dormitory, Wembley came running and practically begged for Xenos' help. After meeting with Fennel, one of the 7 nobles, Goldrin returned to his office visibly unsettled. He recalled Fennel telling him about his daughter's condition. She'd developed a rash on her face that kept spreading. Goldrin suspected it was a case of strange face and concluded it would leave a scar after surgery. While the scar could be erased with health transfer magic using enough donors, Fennel's daughter refused to let strangers see her face. Worried about having only 2 assistants at most during the procedure, Guldran left his office to check on the dog. On the way, he ran into Bonds, who told him the animal had been hit by a carriage. Guldran immediately lost it, but Bonds calmed him down, assuring him it wasn't his fault and that the dog had been healed. Guldran rushed to see for himself and was completely floored to find the animal in perfect condition. Meanwhile, Wembley was desperately pleading with Xenos to help him, since he'd been put in charge of healing Charlotte, Fennel's daughter, who suffered from strange face. He whined that he didn't want to mess up her face and leave scars, or he'd be shark food. Omen wondered why Wembley had been chosen, and after he shot her a cold look, Wembley confessed he'd taken the credit for healing Guldran's dog. Disappointed as always, Omen asked why he hadn't just told the truth, but Wembley explained that if the second secretary found out he was a fraud, he'd be finished. Desperate, he begged Xenos for help, even calling him Big Bro. Lily walked in with tea. When Wembley complimented her, she immediately snapped back that she belonged to Xenos. Confused and wondering if there was something different going on between the siblings, Wembley awkwardly called her little sis too. Days later, Wembley and Xenos followed Guldran to Fennel's mansion after a sudden summons. Fennel explained that Charlotte was refusing the surgery and had locked herself in her room, saying she didn't want scars on her face. He believed Guldran could perform the surgery without leaving marks and begged him to convince her. Moments later, they all went to her door. Fennel tried to talk Charlotte into accepting the surgery, but failed miserably. Even Guldran tried, but the spoiled girl swore she wouldn't let a blade touch her skin. While the adults went back and forth, Wembley whispered to Xenos about his brilliant plan to marry into a rich family. He wanted Xenos to heal Charlotte while he took the credit, figuring it would make her fall for him. When he tried to charm her on his own, he learned the hard way that he was nowhere near the main character energy he thought he had. With Wembley's dream going up in flames, Xenos decided to give it a shot. Instead of pushing her, he said it was completely fine if she didn't want the surgery. He rambled about how people get attached to their appearance after fear sets in, and even joked that she'd end up looking like a little old lady if she avoided treatment. Just as he was about to leave, Charlotte surprised everyone by opening the door and letting them in. Inside, Wembley was drooling over the expensive paintings, and when asked about her facial condition, he talked again. As expected, she shut him down immediately and told him to know his place. Guldran tried once more to convince her to go through with the surgery, but she kept refusing to let a blade touch her face without a guarantee there would be no scar. Irritated, she left the room and went to sit on the balcony among the birds. Out of options, Xenos followed her. He tried to make small talk, but she told him to be quiet. Then he noticed one of the birds was injured. Charlotte, identifying with the little creature, murmured that it would never be able to touch the grass again. Xenos picked up the bird and asked if she wanted it healed, and she immediately pushed him away. Persistent, he asked again, and this time Charlotte snapped, yelling that she didn't want any scars. She looked him dead in the eye and demanded to know who he thought he was, and Xenos calmly said, "My patient." To her astonishment, the injured bird she had given up on suddenly flapped its wings and took flight. Xenos said he didn't care whether she was royalty, nobility, or a commoner. Healing his patients was his job. After the bird returned to her, Charlotte asked if it could fly again, and he assured her it could. Not long after, Charlotte was sedated in the operating room while Xenos and Wembley got ready. Xenos mentioned he'd done a similar surgery when he was young, which made Wembley breathe a huge sigh of relief thinking Xenos would take over. But Guldran told Wembley that he'd be performing the procedure. The kid nearly had a meltdown. He'd never done anything like this before. Xenos quickly told him to just follow his instructions and that everything would be fine. Scanning Charlotte's face, Xenos carefully guided Wembley step by step. Wembley followed along, but then spotted the root of strange face tangled with one of her nerves. In a panic, he asked Guldran whether he should close up and refer her to a second operation at the Royal Hospital. Guldran immediately refused. He couldn't risk his reputation taking a hit, so he pushed Wembley to keep going. In his panic, Wembley accidentally cut the nerve and earned a harsh scolding. Alarmed, Fennel demanded to know what had gone wrong, and Guldran, sweating bullets, blamed Wembley while insisting they'd reconnect the nerve with health transfer magic at the Royal Hospital the next day. To everyone's surprise, Xenos stepped in calmly, saying it wasn't a big deal. He removed the root of strange face with a precise motion and reconnected the nerve right then and there. After the surgery, Charlotte woke up and touched her own face, relieved to find it completely restored. She asked for Guldran, but Fennel explained he'd left for the Royal Hospital to prepare for the elections. Remembering Xenos' words, she later found out his name from the gardener. Later at the Royal Hospital, Xenos helped carry several of Becker's bottles to storage. Becker showed up shortly after and heard that the operation had been a success. He'd barely finished complimenting Xenos for impressing Guldran when Wembley came running to announce they'd been invited to one of Guldran's dinners. Becker praised Xenos again for moving the plan forward. While Omen clowned on Wembley until he exploded and stormed off, Wembley told Xenos to meet him in the lobby that night for the party. After he left, Becker congratulated Xenos once more, saying he was genuinely glad Xenos had taken the risk, because no one had ever received an invitation to one of Goldrin's parties that quickly. At the party, Goldrin addressed the guests and his followers, reminding them that the current director of the Royal Hospital was about to retire. He made it clear that with the votes and backing of one of the 7 nobles, he was the frontrunner to take the position. After the speech, Wembley started brown-nosing the professor, and then tried to play the cool friend with Xenos and Lily, but the two of them hit him with the most epic cold shoulder imaginable. Lily cut in and asked why he hadn't invited Omen, pointing out that he'd clearly failed to bring any game. Wembley huffed, claiming Omen's looks weren't enough to liven up the party. Goldrin raised a toast to everyone, calling them the chosen among his followers. While the others enjoyed the party, Xenos and Lily started working the room, digging for information about Afrid, who had vanished after a similar event. The trail led them to Bonds, the drunk secretary, who was the last person seen with Afrid. While they talked, Xenos couldn't help but find it strange that someone like Bonds was Goldrin's first secretary. Lily pushed a little further, asking how Bonds had gotten the job, but Bonds brushed her off and walked away. Suspicious, Lily grabbed more bottles and decided to get him drunk enough to spill the secrets, a technique she'd picked up from Carmilla. After a few rounds, Bonds was completely wrecked and started rambling about the past. Seeing the opening, Xenos asked about Afrid. When Bonds stalled trying to remember, Xenos took him outside, trying to recreate the same setting Afrid had been in. On the way, Bonds dropped his bottle and started reconstructing an incident from 13 years ago, confusing Xenos for Goldrin, and let slip that Fennel had backed Goldrin during an explosion around that time. But just as he was about to reveal the important part, Bonds passed out completely. Back inside, Lily asked if Xenos had finished gathering the information. He admitted he still felt like something was missing. Out of nowhere, Carmilla appeared and proudly announced she'd put the entire puzzle together just from listening to Bonds ramble. Xenos praised her at first, but quickly realized she was trolling them again. Meanwhile, at the underground clinic, the trio of clan leaders was in a heated discussion about why they all kept showing up every single day. The argument was cut short when Lyra's brother walked in covered in blood. He explained that one of the beastkin had been critically injured in an accident. Lyra asked when Xenos would be back, but the others warned it might be too late, and insisted on taking the injured person to him. At first, Lyra refused, saying Xenos was undercover and they couldn't risk blowing his identity. But after they reminded her that Xenos would be furious if he found out she hadn't told him, she caved and agreed, offering to pay double the usual rate for treatment. Back at Goldrin's party, Carmilla dropped the act and floated a theory. Goldrin might have faked saving the noble. Xenos tried to process what she was getting at, but Lily's inner Sherlock kicked in. She pieced it together. Bonds had probably witnessed the incident, and that's how he'd secured his secretary position through blackmail. Later, he'd probably let something slip to Afrid, which could explain the disappearance, out of fear that Bonds might remember what he'd said. Suddenly, Wembley reappeared and pulled Lily away to introduce her to some big names at the party. Alone with Carmilla, Xenos shared his own theory. He suspected Goldrin had used life transfer magic during the explosion 13 years ago, healing Fennel by draining the life force from the victims around him. If Afrid had been one of the survivors, it could mean he'd disappeared in order to get revenge. With that thought, Xenos thanked Carmilla for her help. She turned away with her usual tsundere energy, saying she'd only done it to settle the tab for the Zombie King disaster. When Xenos went to rejoin the others, he found them on the balcony watching Omen arguing with the guards at the entrance. She was asking to see him, but they were blocking the way, saying she didn't have an invitation and couldn't interrupt Goldrin's party. Suddenly, the Beastkin trio showed up with one of their own critically injured. Goldrin immediately ordered the guards to throw them out, but Livia bulldozed through the guards like they weren't even there, and the group stormed in demanding Xenos. The moment Lyra spotted him, she apologized for blowing his cover and begged him to heal her kinsman. Without hesitating, Xenos made the call to help, shocking Goldrin, who warned him not to throw away his chance at becoming an elite. But Xenos didn't care. He simply said he was a healer, took Lily by the arm, and walked toward the demi-humans. Furious, Goldrin called him an idiot and swore he'd never work as a healer again. He turned to Wembley, asking if he'd make a different choice, but Wembley shocked everyone by following Xenos' lead. He loudly declared he was leaving Goldrin's faction, then ran after Xenos, only to find that the treatment was already done. Frustrated, Wembley muttered that maybe he was just a useless idiot, but Omen walked over and told him she respected his choice regardless. Xenos then introduced Wembley to the others as his annoying little brother. The next day, Xenos updated Becker and Omen on everything he'd uncovered about Goldrin and his suspicions about Afrid. Becker revealed that Afrid had once mentioned being caught in a major explosion when he was young. With Goldrin about to be formally installed as director the next day, Becker suspected Afrid might finally make his move. Thanking Xenos for everything up to that point, Becker said he'd need one more day to finish the paperwork. and that after that, he promised to share more information about the master. That afternoon, Omen and Wembley showed up at Xenos' dormitory for a small going-away gathering. Wembley got completely wrecked on liquor when he learned the truth, that Xenos was an underground healer. While he lamented losing Xenos as an ally, Carmilla appeared. Wembley blinked, figuring it was just the alcohol messing with him. Omen almost lost it, but Xenos calmed her down, saying Carmilla had a good heart. Later that night, after the party, Xenos confided in Carmilla. Despite coming from the slums, he said Omen and Wembley had never once treated him like trash. The goodbye left him with a heavy head. Carmilla reminded him that was part of being human. The next day, as Xenos was getting ready to leave, Omen showed him a letter Becker had written with information about the master. When they went to Becker's office to pick it up, they stumbled onto an old photograph showing Guldran healing Fennel by stealing the life force from the wounded around him. Meanwhile, back at the party venue, Guldran and everyone present were unconscious. Minutes before the incident, Guldran and his faction had been at his inauguration, and Fennel had congratulated him on the achievement. Guldran then flashed back to finding Fennel trapped in an explosion at the magic tool factory, healing the noble with life transfer magic by draining the life force from the other victims around him. Bonds had documented the incident and used it to secure his livelihood. At the event, Becker appeared with a drink to congratulate Guldran on his appointment as director. He poured the glass, while the new director went on about how Xenos had disappointed him by choosing to heal demi-humans, insisting that not all lives carried the same value. Shortly after, Fennel nearly narrated how Guldran had saved him in the past, but Guldran gently asked him to skip that part. Then he toasted with his faction and blacked out on the spot. Omen remembered Becker visiting Bonds the night before, and as they examined the photo, she recognized Alfred and Becker's fiancée among the victims of the explosion. At present, Guldran woke up to find all of his followers unconscious. He saw Becker, who informed him that he'd poisoned everyone, and that they'd have about an hour before they were gone. Becker then revealed that he planned to recreate what had happened 13 years ago, and that with Xenos' help, he'd managed to follow the trail. All it took was getting Bonds drunk with the right substance to find out what had happened, and coincidentally finding the photograph of the incident. Becker then informed Guldran that Alfred and his fiancée were victims of the explosion. He told Guldran that he had enough strength to use health transfer magic, and that with the number of lives in the room, he could slow the progression of the poison. Then he asked who he would choose to sacrifice and who he would save. After letting him make the choice, Guldran asked Becker for the antidote, promising not to punish him too severely when it was all over. But Becker stunned him by swallowing the poison himself. Then he joined the group that Guldran would have to make a choice about, saying it was up to him to save his own life, if he believed there was an antidote. Faced with so many choices, Guldran began draining the life force from the others to save himself first. Becker then questioned the choice, pointing out that he himself had the highest life force in the room, but Guldran argued that his own life came before the others. He immediately made the case that not all lives were equal and compared them to coins whose values varied by nature. Suddenly, Becker started coughing up blood, and the students flooded into the hallway. Seeing the mess he'd made, Omen asked why, and he told them how he'd lost his fiancée 13 years ago in the factory explosion. He'd been pushed to the edge of revenge upon learning from Alfred that his fiancée hadn't died solely from the accident, but also from the effect of Guldran's magic. Xenos realized the reason he'd been recruited was to gather evidence, but Becker couldn't wait any longer, so he'd taken matters into his own hands. Furious, Wembley yelled at him and expressed solidarity with his loss. He agreed that Guldran was absolute scum, but didn't believe that poisoning others was the right way to handle the situation. Healers existed to save people. After hearing him out, Xenos recalled the thought-provoking question Becker had asked before and said he'd pick up all the coins. Surprised, Becker asked if Xenos planned to save everyone, and he confirmed it. Even with nothing in it for himself, he swore he wouldn't let Becker become a mass murderer under normal circumstances. Xenos needed to know the toxicity of the poison to help with a fast recovery. But seeing that Becker wouldn't last if he kept asking questions, Xenos cast a mass heal on the group, choosing to tank the strain of the spell long enough for the toxins to leave everyone's systems. After an exhausting effort, everyone except Guldran recovered from the poison. Guldran then ordered Xenos to heal him, but Xenos reminded him he wasn't part of his faction and that he'd need to pay for the service. Guldran's own followers refused to heal their boss after realizing he'd tried to sacrifice them to save himself. Xenos presented a bill so outrageous that even Guldran found it unhinged, but after remembering his life was on the line, the miser agreed. Unfortunately for him, Fennel coldly said they'd be having a very detailed discussion about what he'd done later. The next day, Xenos and Omen visited Becker, who had been taken into custody by the royal guard. Krishna showed up assuming Xenos had used Becker as an excuse to see her, but he burst her bubble and thanked her for setting up the meeting. After that, Omen asked whether Becker had poisoned the wine, and he informed them that he'd prepared a drug that would only temporarily paralyze the body. He'd intended to trick Goldrin into thinking it was a lethal toxin, but when he'd tested the compound, he realized it had been tampered with. He suspected Alfred was the one behind it and believed he must have blended into the crowd and pretended to take the poison. Omen immediately tried to justify Becker's actions, but he disagreed with her, pointing out his own mistake in going through with the plan, even after realizing the wine had been tampered with. Krishna then assured them they didn't need to worry, saying she could use her authority as vice captain to get Becker released. He agreed with her, and before Xenos left the room, Becker warned him to be careful with Alfred. It was suspicious how he'd managed to survive the explosion and had still managed to mess up his plans. As always, Xenos swore he'd send Alfred the bill for every bit of trouble he'd caused up to that point. As the healers were leaving, Krishna told Becker she was jealous that Xenos had come to visit him and not her. He explained that he'd done it for Omen's sake, and that because of Omen's difficult situation, he was trying to clear his own name. For her, Krishna, surprised by how much Xenos was willing to do for Omen, Krishna learned from Becker that Xenos treated all lives as equal. Somewhere, the guide spoke about how Xenos had interfered with his plans to collect more data on human behavior. The wind blew back his hood, revealing that he was afraid, but not completely. He complimented Alfred's body, saying he'd make use of it a little longer. The next day, Xenos and Lily said their goodbyes to Omen and Wembley before heading back to the slums. On the way home, Xenos treated several injured people along the route, and when they finally arrived at the underground clinic, the Beastkin trio welcomed them back like it was a full-on party. And that's it for today. If you're enjoying recaps like this one, drop a comment down below. I always read every single one. Check out this other video too. You're gonna love it. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.